We live in a day and age when we travel, we don't really need maps anymore, do we? It used to be, you were going on a trip, you'd get a bunch of maps together, or maybe you'd go to AAA and have them do it for you, and they'd plot out your route, and they'd highlight everything, or you'd highlight everything, and you'd have all these maps, and you'd be watching them closely as you traveled. I remember those days. But now, we don't know where we're going. We just hop online. Well, we type in an address, and bam, we get step-by-step directions to where we're going. But even that's kind of old school nowadays, isn't it? Because most people today, when they're traveling far or to a place they don't know, we use a GPS, a global positioning device. And if you don't know what it is, it's an electronic device. It's usually small, and you just turn it on, and it's got the screen on, and you input the address of where you want to go, and you put it on your dashboard there, and it calculates the most efficient route for you to take. And so as you start out, it's there, and it's got kind of a map on there that you can look at as you drive, and it tells you step by step, what lane you need to be in. You got a turn coming up, you need to prepare for it. Turn here right now, and it tells you. So they're pretty nifty devices. I don't have one, but I've used them, and just show of hands, who here has used one of these? So yeah, we know this, right? Thank you. And they're fun nowadays because you can get different voices. Different celebrities have gotten in, and they lend their voices. So the celebrity voice can tell you what to do while you're driving. And I found one GPS system had offerings that included Kim Cattrall, Dennis Hopper, Mr. T. How about Mr. T telling you where to go, right? Mr. T, Burt Reynolds, some of you like him, Snoop Dogg, and others. And that's just the real people. And we have all these other fictional voices, characters that we know and are familiar with. We love. You can be told where to drive by Darth Vader and C-3PO and Yoda. Those are the best ones, let's be honest, right? But also Bugs Bunny, Daffy Duck, Yosemite Sam, Beavis and Butthead. Who's going to listen to Beavis and Butthead for directions? I don't know. But Captain Jack Sparrow, Marge or Homer Simpson. So it's fun. There's no end to the voices that can kind of boss you around as you're driving. But even though these GPS systems, they'll tell you where to go, you can't just check out. You can't just do what they tell you mindlessly. Because if you do, well, every once in a while you might get in trouble because sometimes they're not quite right. As in the case of, I found this. After driving his car off the ferry, an Alaska man's GPS told him to take a hard right. Perhaps feeling that it was unnecessary to specify that he should finish driving out of the harbor before making the turn. Instead, the GPS's words were taken as the immediate gospel, and the man swerved his car directly onto a boat launch and into the Prince William Sound. He was able to rescue himself and his dog, but his cat was trapped in a pet taxi and will remain a tragic lesson for us all. These tragic things happen because people just kind of check out. So because some people hear these things, they're like, well, I don't trust those things. I'm not going to use one, right? And so they don't like them, and they're not going to use it. Whether you like GPS systems or not, I have to be honest with you and tell you, you got one inside you that's guiding you all the time. And for these ideas, I'm indebted to Greg Laurie, who points out that God has placed a homing instinct inside human beings who are uniquely made in God's image. So God puts this GPS-like instinct in all people, and it provides direction for us. And just like that GPS, we can follow what our internal instinct says, or we cannot follow it. The truth is, as we're growing up, we don't always recognize this at first, that this is actually something in us telling us what to do. But we know from the moment we are born, we are on a quest. We are trying to get somewhere, and it takes different forms, and it manifests itself in different ways. So when we're little, we kind of like, I'm supposed to be getting somewhere. Where am I supposed to be getting? Well, maybe I just want to get more toys, right? And so you're driven to get more toys. But as you're older, that kind of morphs into other things, this relationship or that possession or this position or that accomplishment. And what's going on is we all have that internal drive that God has put us there. And so we have a homesickness for a place we have never been, and that place is heaven. God wired us that way. Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verse 11 tells us that God has set eternity in the human heart. It's there in our hearts, and we're being driven toward it. Now, sometimes we get confused about what the ultimate goal is. So we know we're driven towards something, so we go after some of these other things. But ultimately, what we long for is God in eternity. That's really what we want. And once we figure this out, well, that's when life changes, and we develop this eternal perspective then. So we see things in light of eternity. We realize, hey, things in this earth, They could be fun or pleasurable for a while, but they're temporary. But because we figured this out, we now know there are things that are eternal. And they matter even more. And so it changes the way we think. It changes the way we live. And this eternal perspective we can hone into. This is why followers of Jesus can accept that God is a good God. He's a loving God. He will take care of us even though horrible things happen, like a disaster. Hurricane Harvey, Ira, Jose, whatever Jose ends up doing. They come and they wreak all sorts of death and suffering. But those who have an eternal perspective still trust God because we have this eternal perspective, not just this is happening now, but eternally. We know God's going to take that and he's going to bring about his good purposes through it or because of it or in spite of it. That's having an eternal perspective. And God places in us all this drive, this GPS that drives us to get there, to have that eternal perspective. And when we do, we find that life changes in all sorts of wonderful ways. It's like when you use your GPS to travel on vacation. Like, I'm going to be doing that this week, right? Later this week. But you use it and you get to where you're going. You're like, oh, this is wonderful. And that's what it's like. You have this eternal perspective. You know who had an eternal perspective? Abram, or as he's later renamed by God, Abraham. Abraham, he was a man that had this eternal perspective because we see in today's scripture lesson that he is called by God. God says, leave your house, leave your family, and go. Go to some unknown destination. And because Abram has this eternal perspective, he packed up and went. Didn't even leave behind a forwarding address. He didn't even know where he was going to end up. Right? So he just goes. And he changed the world. He became a world changer because he did that. Didn't have a GPS. All he had was a directive from God. But that was enough for him. So when Abram was 75 years old, I won't ask you all how far under that or over that you are. But 75 years... Age isn't a hindrance for God. It's never a hindrance for God. We make it a hindrance. But God handpicks Abram when he's 75 years old. God's going to say, Abram, I'm picking you now to set my plan of salvation for the world into the next phase. Because we know ultimately God's plan for salvation for the world is culminated in the work of Jesus Christ on the cross. Jesus being a direct descendant of Abraham. And Jesus being a result of all the promises we're going to talk about here today. So in Genesis 12:1, show us, Jim. God comes to Abram and he says, go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. God, in essence, tells Abram to pick up his whole life and go. Get your wife, get your orphan nephew Lot, and get anybody who's part of your household, meaning any servants you might have or anything, and just go. Go where? Isn't that the first question we ask? Go where? Someone tells you to go where? God says, to a place I will show you. I will, someday, right? It's like God didn't tell Abram what the land was, didn't tell him where the land was, didn't tell Abram where he was going to live or where he was going to be in the meantime. Just go. I'll take care of the details. And some of you are already like, oh, no one else takes care of the details. I take care of the details. No, God says, I'll take care of the details. Now, I want you to stop and think what your response would be to this. And I thought, how can we bring this down to reality for us? Don't even think of it in terms of God coming and saying, I want you to pick up your whole life and go here. Think about it just in terms of doing your friend a favor. Your friend calls you up one day and says, hey, can you give me a ride? And you're like, sure. So you drive over to your friend's house. Your friend gets in your car and just says, go. And so you get to the end of the driveway and you're like, well, which way? And your friend says, well, we'll just go. All right, you're going to humor your friend. So you go. And you're driving for a while, and your friend finally looks at you and says, well, no, I want you to go not this way. Well, where do you want me to go? Not this way. And you're starting to get to like, well, if you would just tell me where you want to get to, I could get us there. It's just don't go this way. So you're like, all right. And you turn off and you're traveling and you're going. And your friend sits there for a while, and finally your friend says, well, now I want you to go easterly. Or east. Well, which road? It doesn't matter. Just go east-ish. Now, how long would you put up with this? You're already at the end of things. And this is just to give your friend a ride, right? And this is the kind of thing God told Abraham to do with his entire existence, his entire livelihood. Pick up your life and go. Go where? Just go. To us, it's insane because we have to be in control. We always have to know where we're going, at least. Most of the time, how we're getting there. I got a plan. Always got to have a plan. Always got to follow the plan. And look what Abram, he's being asked to give up a lot in order to obey God in this crazy scheme, right? Abram had to leave his family, his father's household. Well, these were people he would have had good relationships with and probably even loved many of them or some of them. But not only that, but in those days, being in bigger groups, people meant security. It meant safety, from raiders or bandits. So he's being asked to leave security here. He has to leave his culture. God tells him, I want you to leave your people. Leave their customs, their ways, their expectations, their traditions. Abraham has to leave all the things that help him be comfortable, all the things that are familiar to him. And he's transplanted into a completely different culture. All he's got is his faith in God to get him through. And he's told nothing about where he's going, what it's going to be like, what the outcome is going to be. He's just told, go. Now, leaving your homeland and family was a greater decision in a traditional society like that than it is today, where we're more mobile and we're more individualistic. But back then, Abraham, what he was doing is he was risking everything he held most dear to obey God, to follow after God. And I'm reminded of a story David Platt told us in our counterculture Bible study early in the year. He was talking about a couple who decided to be missionaries overseas. And it was a couple that had some kids, so it was a young family. And his church, they were going to send them. They were going to support them in this. So the leaders of the church were meeting with this missionary couple. And the missionary couple had decided to go minister to overseas. It was dangerous. Like the people group they were going to be trying to take Jesus to did not deal well with outsiders. And so there's very likelihood that this could become a deadly situation. And so one of the leaders in the church kind of looks at the mother and father, the couple, and they're like, how can you even risk your kids by doing this? And the answer from the mother was pretty much, we can risk it because God calls us to it. How about that for an answer? Who here has faith like that? That's astonishing. Willing to risk everything to obey God. That's the kind of risk, and even greater risk, that Abram is faced with when he's receiving this directive from God. God comes and says, pick up and go. But God just doesn't leave it at that directive. Show us, Jim, and in the following two verses, God kind of makes some promises. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. Just two verses, lots of promises there, lots of promise of blessing, right? God says, I promise, Abram, I'm going to make you into a great nation. Now, Abram doesn't have any kids, and he's past the age where you would normally have kids, and so is his wife. But God says, I promise you're going to be a great nation. You yourself, Abram, are going to be blessed. And he says, this promise that Abram's name will be made great. So those who hear your name, Abram, they're going to be blessed by knowing about you. Abram, you are going to become a blessing to others. And the promise that blessings and curses will be handed out according to how people respond and react to Abram. So Abram, if people react well to you, they're going to be blessed. So you're going to be bringing blessing to them. And finally, God gets around saying, I'm going to bless all people, everyone in the whole world through you. Wow, those are great promises. These promises of blessings, they're just hanging out there, ready for Abraham to grasp them. But the cost, the risk, the uncertainty of the how and when, those are huge. What would you do? We know what Abram did. Abram took God up in the challenge. Abram obeyed God. Abram's faith fixed in him that eternal perspective that we talked about. Abram didn't have a roadmap. What he had was a directive from God. And to his credit, without argument, Abram obeyed. God said go, and Abram went. This is faith. It's that eternal perspective in action. Jim, show us how Hebrews 11:8 describes it. By faith, Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. Oftentimes we look at people and we say, well, they don't even know where they're going, right? But no, Abraham, it didn't seem like he knew where he was going. And you look at this in the original language, and you study it, and some people have, and I found their research, it kind of reveals that Abram's faith was so great that he's not concerned at all about the details. He wasn't really concerned about what the future of this country is that God's talking about, or what he would be there. His faith displaced all his worry about the future and this country God was going to lead him to. It means Abram didn't even think about the matter. He just up and went because God said to. By faith, Abram wasn't looking to his own agenda. He wasn't looking to his own plan, his own ideas about what should happen, his own comfort, his own security. Jim, show us, please, Hebrews 11:10. Because we go, what was Abram looking at? This is what he was looking to. For he was looking forward to the city with foundations, whose architect and builder is God. What's Abram looking at instead of himself? He's looking at what God's doing. What is God building? Abram's focused on God. And that's it. He's not looking to himself. And Hebrews 11 tells us Abram takes God up on the promises by faith. Because Abram obeys God, he releases the blessings of the promise. And blessings that he and his son and his grandson end up living in. And that we still live in today because the promise continues through our faith in Jesus Christ. And we see that Abram's obedience, it's defined by his actions. Not mere intellectual assent. Oh God, you said that and I believe it. Okay, good. No. Abram, he couldn't just believe it or think it. He went. He did. And he had to give up a lot. He had to release that control on his own life, on the future, in order to obey God by faith. He was looking to the eternal plan of God. He had that eternal perspective. And God calls us to have that faith-fueled eternal perspective as well. Abram obeyed God and left home for a far-off place, not knowing where he was going, and he changed the history of the world. Abram became a world changer, and God calls you and me to be world changers by faith. And we say, well, can we ever be as big a world changer as Abram? Maybe not, but God calls us to be world changers in our own way. God calls you and me to obey him by faith because of that eternal perspective he has placed in each and every one of us, and he desires to grow there. Like Abram, we don't always have the final destination. Like Abram, we don't always have even a clear initial direction. We just sense a directive or a calling from God. And we don't really know where we're going. Faith has that quality about it, that quality of not knowing quite where you're heading. Some people need to know. They need to know the plan. They need to know the destination and every step to get there. And it reminded me of some things I saw in the news this week, and we were actually kind of talking about it with some of you during the Sunday school hour today. You saw the news reports this week as they were trying to predict where Irma was going. And earlier in the week, they had three options. Irma's going to swing west and then head north and hit the west coast of Florida, which it looks like she's doing now. That was one option, but some other options said no, she's going to swing right through the center of Florida. And then another option, which kind of became more popular later in the week, was no, she's going to go north before going west. So she's going to hit the east coast of Florida and maybe other states in our country. And so there were all these eventualities that they were going, and they were reporting on the news. And then they'd go out and interview people who live in these places where the hurricane might come through. And you'd see these people, and they're like, I'm not evacuating until I know I have to, or until I know it's coming my way for sure, I'm not planning on leaving. And we see these people, don't we? They have to know exactly what's happening before they commit to an action. They got to know the plan. They got to know how it's all going to play out before they do anything. And meanwhile, I'm sitting in the comfort of my home, watching them on TV, shouting at, as if they can hear me, right? Shouting at them, no, hurricane's coming, just get out, just go. If you wait till you know for certain, then it's too late. Have we learned nothing from Katrina and Harvey? And we've even heard stories of people saying, well, now that I can go, I can't because all the gas is out, or, it's too late. And it kind of reminds me of what we're talking about here today. Some people just need to know everything before they're going to step out in faith. But if you're someone who wants to be a faithful follower of Jesus Christ, then you better get ready. Get ready for stepping into the unknown. Because you haven't seen where faith may lead you. And rarely do you see where your faith is going to lead you. No, faith often carries with it an element of adventure. Kind of like your Indiana Jones, right? Yeah, at the beginning of the Indiana Jones movie, he's here, and throughout the movie, he's going to be at 17 other countries, and at the beginning of the movie, he has no idea he's going to all those places. That's you when you're stepping out in faith. Get ready for becoming more of a pilgrim than a tour guide. You think of a tour guide. Tour guide is someone who's been in a place long enough, they know everything about the place, they're comfortable here, they're comfortable enough, I'm going to share what I know even with other people. No, you're a person of faith. You're not the tour guide. You're the pilgrim just on a journey passing through. You have no idea what's coming next. Get ready for following close to Jesus. In faith, we follow Jesus' teaching and his example. Isn't that one of our core values? The supremacy and authority of Scripture. Scripture is where we see Jesus' teaching and his example. And so it's through faith we grow and know him personally. You want to be challenged in your faith. You want your faith to grow. You're going to follow Jesus closely. And that means you're following him someplace you can't see most of the time. That's faith. It's always heading out. It's always heading outward. Jesus knows the way. We don't. But Jesus does. And that's enough for the person of faith to take the next step. When God called Abram to faith, God promised the blessings. Abram, you obey me. Here are the promises of blessings. A promise to bless Abram and his family, to bless those who help Abram, to deal with those who oppose Abram, to bless the entire world through Abram's faith and what Abram will do in his faith. And when God calls us to faith and desires for us to be obedient, those same promises are there for us. But we're robbing ourselves of the blessings that come out of those promises. How many blessings do we rob ourselves of because we fail to obey God by faith? Because I got to know before God, right? No. God waits to bless us and to bless all the people we love around us, and maybe even people to far places in the world. And we say, no thanks, God. I'm just going to go and do this over here my way where I'm comfortable. I'm holding on to my security. Like Linus in that security blanket in the Peanuts cartoons. Man, he's never without that thing. He just clutches onto that thing. And that's what we do. I'm just gonna hold on to my security. I'm holding on to my plans, my own vision, my comfort, my way. This is the story of all of us, right? And the promise of God, they go unfulfilled. Not because God isn't faithful. Now, we sang about God's faithfulness. Let's be honest. The reason the promises aren't filled is because we have little faith. We have not obeyed God and followed him. We've followed after ourselves. We've failed to trust God and his promises. We've failed to trust in God. As his kids, God calls us out of that me focus. And he calls us instead to have that eternal perspective. He says, stop focusing on yourself and instead look to the eternal story that I am making, I am writing, I am telling. Stop looking at your own little island there. Instead, follow God into his story. He calls us, every day, God calls us in simple ways to just take steps of faith. And it's different in other people's life. And I tried to think of some things this week. You might have to give up some time or some comfort. But by faith, get to know that difficult person at your workplace or in your community or in your neighborhood so that person can see the love of Jesus Christ in you. You have to give up some security. But by faith, maybe you sponsor that child through Compassion International or World Vision or Hope Changes Everything. You might have to sacrifice some of your abundant family time the way Abram did. But by faith, commit to that ministry, that after-school program, that idea that we're going to go visit people at the high-rise, whatever it is, commit to it. You have to give up control. That need to know exactly how things are going to turn out. But by faith, follow God where he's leading. And he calls us to these steps of faith, simple steps of faith, every single day. And he says, obey me here. I'm going to bless you. Sometimes they're bigger things. As church family, we are considering different possibilities for the future of our congregations. And in some ways, it's scary. And it seems insane to even think about these things. Because you've got to leave behind security, got to leave behind familiarity, got to leave behind comfort, our usual way of doing things. But God says, by faith, be obedient and looking to what I am doing and following me there. He says, come together and figure it out together and then follow me. I don't know what the outcome is, but God says, be faithful to look at it. Sure, there are questions. There are risks. There are adjustments that would need to be made. But maybe there are endless possibilities. Maybe there are endless blessings. And just God calls us in simple ways and calls us in large ways to be people of faith. He doesn't give us the whole story. He gives us that next step. He gives us that directive the same way he gave Abram that directive. God today calls you to follow that GPS that he has placed in your heart for that eternal perspective. He calls you to leave behind your security. Leave behind your custom. Leave behind your expectations and your way of doing things. He calls you to look at things his way. Not through the lens of self, but through the lens of eternity. And then go. Go where? To the place he will show you someday. You see, the final outcome is not important to us today. What's important to us today is obeying God in faith. By faith.